When our son was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, we wanted to know everything science and experience has proven effective. What we found was a lot more than we were shown at the hospital. With so many highly educated, seasoned professionals operating outside the bounds of conventional medicine, it just didn't make sense to limit ourselves when the stakes were that high. This approach paid off, and now we're bringing the information to you. Wisdom from the top integrative and holistic cancer doctors and healers around the world, all in one place. Because you deserve true answers to cancer. It's time for a revolution against one-size-fits-all medicine, a revolution that takes us back around to the old ways of healing and forward to the new. That revolution starts right here. When it comes to reversing or preventing cancer, this is where you come for the best of the best. I'm Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, and this is the Anti-Cancer Revolution. Hey there, it's Ryan, and this is one of my favorite talks from our Anti-Cancer Revolution online conference series. Stick around to the end to find out how to ask these healers anything you want yourself. But in the meantime, enjoy and take something you can use right now from the show. Welcome back to the Anti-Cancer Revolution 2, everyone. I am Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, and in this session we have with us Dr. Jason Miller, who is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, whose medical career has been focused on the collaborative management of patients with cancer and chronic disease. He is a faculty member at the Mediri Foundation's clinical training program, training healthcare professionals in the collaborative management of cancer and chronic disease by addressing the internal biological terrain. In 2005, Jason co-founded his inpatient clinic, Jade Mountain Medicine, Inc. in Ashland, Oregon. Since 2006, he has served as the medical director for Natura Health Products, where he presents monthly webinars and hosts interviews on the role of botanical and nutritional medicine in health and disease. Jason is a formulator, medical educator, lecturer, and writer who lectures around the country on the role of botanical medicine in the treatment of chronic disease. Dr. Jason Miller, thank you so much for coming on the Anti-Cancer Revolution 2, and how are you today?
Hey, thanks so much, Ryan. It's really an honor to be here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's I think I told you this when I got you on in the first place, but I had just been clicking around and stumbled upon your stuff. I think maybe just researching Donnie Yen and Dwight McKee's sphere of influence, as it were, and yeah, I came upon all the presentations you've put out to the world, which are all really great, and then we ended up getting introduced for this. Very glad to have you on. Long story short, I just read your bio, but before we dive into the information, always like to anything else on a personal note you'd like to share with folks about yourself, or anything you'd like to get out about anything, or and especially just what got you into specializing in cancer out of all the things you could have taken your medical career with.
So what got me into cancer, it's interesting, is I went into, my original passion was for permaculture, was to really go into how we could be a part of the solution as human beings, rather than part of the problem. And as I saw the problem as a young man, it was, overpopulation and the development of, the house and sedentary lifestyles and toxicity in the ecosystem, stress, all the things that I saw happening. I kind of rejected all of that, and I went right into, deep into kind of Taoist thought and meditation, and I really rejected everything, lived in the forest, traveled around the world. Just went to a place that I thought, okay, I'm going to go into permaculture. It was after starting my career, like starting out as a college student and as a high school student, I was just headed for biology, to be a medical doctor and to help people heal that way. But as I got deep into that study, and as we'll kind of get to some of the concepts in this sort of interview, I'm sure I'll talk about just how some of those concepts in science that try to tell you exactly what things are, they kind of break down at some point. If you dig deep enough, there's really no answer. And I got to the point where I was like, wow, this approach to medicine isn't really about healing all of us. It's getting to a place of wholeness and health. It's really about treating sick people, and it's a sick system, and I don't want to be a part of it. So that's when I just shifted out of it, got out of medical school, went into the study of permaculture and agriculture, and then I ended up kind of serendipitously having my wife work with an acupuncturist who was an herbalist, really like a pharmacist. He has this huge pharmacy of all kinds of just materials, and he was super into traditional and classical Chinese medical thought. And I started spending some time with him, and I realized, wow, this is a system that is self-reflective and goes deep into the Taoist thought and the kind of patterns and cycles of nature. And I got really infatuated with the idea that I could take this permaculture concept, tied in with my idea of being a doctor, and become like a permaculture doctor. And that's sort of where I headed. And so I went into the study of Chinese medicine and, got my degree up in Portland, Oregon in 2005. And at the time I was friends with Donnie Yance because he shared a clinic with this other person, Ken Bendat, this acupuncturist who was working there. And so Donnie and I started making music together, kind of out of this, like, again, serendipitous relationship. And then he was like, wow, you're really great. You're going to go to school to study medicine. Why don't you come and work for me when you get done? He came to my graduation. He was very supportive. And he was like, come work for Madiri and come work for, my Natura, and let's do this together. And I was like, that sounds great. And so we started having all these conversations, and pretty soon here I am, just deeply woven in with Donnie. And I mean, it was a crash course. He was even 16 years ago, he was deep into cancer and one of the leading experts. He had just finished his book, Herbal Medicine, Healing and Cancer. And he had, gotten some fame from that and helped a lot of people through the difficult journey that a cancer diagnosis presents. And, so I just started jumping right in, and he was just sort of like, here, we're going to help people. And so we started I had stage 4 cancer cases, just one after another. And I would just take in all the information, sit with them, get it. And then I'd go right to Donnie, and he would just give me the download. Okay, here's what we want to do with this patient. Here's what we want to look for. Here's what we want to find out. And we just started doing this, for like 5 years. It was just really in depth. And we had a, round table meeting that was with Dr. McKee, Jonathan Treasure, another great herbalist, UK trained cancer specialist, and Donnie, myself, a bunch of other docs. And we just would get together and go over all these cases. And so I've just been at it now for 15 years. And it was sort of like a calling that I just stepped up to and said, yeah, this is what I need to do.
That's that's quite a good story. And it's funny, like the deeper you dig into health, and a real holistic, natural, whatever you want to call it, understanding of health, and how all these random things start tying in. Ecology. I've always had kind of a cursory interest in the nature of reality, for lack of a better term, and quantum physics and things like that. And you dig far enough, and you listen to enough people start talking about energy medicine and stuff like that, and all of a sudden all these weird angles all these tie-ins start coming about. And so it's it's just interesting how the lines start to get blurred if you really want to dig down to the depths and see where it all goes. But I don't know, conversation for another time, I suppose.
Well, I'll say one thing on that, Ryan. It's just that, what it comes down to is that we don't really know anything. That's the hardest part about it all. we observe phenomena, right? And we talk about it and we write about it. But if you hang out with experts, like I spend a lot of time with PhDs, with molecular biologists and scientists, and I know that they're really great at what they do, because when you ask them a question, most of the time they'll say, well, we don't really know, but here's what, we can tell you at this point, and that's fascinating to me. And I think there's a humility in that knowingness that helps us to be able to be doctors and take care of people in a way that's humble and meets the reality of the now, which is that we don't really know anything. And with cancer, that's like, my first slide is, what is cancer? And foundationally, and this is something that Dr. McKee and I have talked about at length, is that we don't know what cancer is. It's like it's this shadow side of humanity. We see the outward manifestations of it. We see a tumor. We see hematological changes. Huge amounts of white blood cells. We see that monoclonal expansion of a cell line. We see the ecological changes in the body. But what is it? Nobody actually knows. So I'll just start with that.
Yeah, no, I think I forget which presentation I was kind of going back and forth with this concept with on somebody, but they talked about, the cancer is not necessarily its own disease. If you look at it that way, it's more of a manifestation of underlying conditions and what's going on. And then they brought it to, well, if you look at like the whole world, and that's cancer is kind of a manifestation of what's going on with the whole world. And that's why there's more and more cases. You got kind of a microcosm, macrocosm thing happening there. And it's, yeah.
Well, I'll just plug one thing. It's just that I'm working on a film right now, and it's basically about cancering and about living and dying and cancer and about humanity and where we are and what's happening. And I always believe that, there's this old adage that says, as within, so without. And I've been changing that to as without, so within. And the more we shape the ecosystem around us, the more we see it reflected in us. And that we're seeing that, you know, in a very powerful way right now, that as we look at the manifestation of our actions on the planet, from uncontrolled growth to the use of all kinds of different fuels, to the buildup of toxicity, to, you know, the stagnation of energy in all kinds of different places, the kind of the coagulation of human existence. And I mean, it just goes on and on. The biological mechanics of the human body, what manifests when cancer is present, and how you look at it, and metaphorically, you see how it's playing out at the global level, like you said, macro to micro. It's really profound, and it's influenced my, you know, just my whole being and my whole approach to medicine, you know, hugely.
Well, yeah. On that note, just one final thought is, yeah, you'll be pleased to know that. So I got a steel comb because I didn't want a plastic comb.
Nice.
And so I sought out this, you know, what other kind of comb can I get? And so I found a steel comb, and then the you know, the company that made the steel comb, you had, like, you know, a free engraving or whatever on it, and so now every day when I get my comb out in the mirror, it's as within, so without. And so, you know,
Nice.
what I start my day with. So there you go.
Beautiful, beautiful.
But it also goes both ways, as you mentioned there, for sure. Yeah. Anyway, enough with the esoteric ramblings. Let's
Well
get to
said.
the presentation, and
Yeah.
and yeah, like I mentioned to you, I think before we started recording, I'll jump in for any clarification my layman brain sees fit to ask for. Anything about the presentation, any setup you want to give folks before you jump in, or I guess I'll just let you.
I'll just say that I think, you know, back to that idea that we don't really know anything. Ultimately, you know, like I said, we talk about phenomena, and we do our best to understand the workings of the world. But I think that just as doctors, as teachers, you know, there's a storytelling element about it all, and that if you can bring together a story that weaves together themes, you know, threads that create a bigger tapestry that people can observe, something that has meaning and purpose, you know. And I feel like I took this slide, I took this interview as an opportunity to weave a story of what I know through my experience, through endless days and hours of research, you know, to bring it together in a way that people can see it, can get, you know, can kind of get something out of it, hopefully take something home that will influence, you know, how maybe the outcomes of someone they know, they love, and maybe help people, you know, see a little deeper into this whole cancer pandemic, really. And I mean, we talk about COVID as a pandemic, but I tell you, I think that you know, cancer is the pandemic. I call it the disease of our time, and that's, you know, that's where I'm putting most of my energy. I wanted to start with you know, this talk is really on targeting the biological terrain, you know, and we do that with lots of different methods and lots of different toolboxes. And, you know, at Madiri Medicine, we talk about different toolboxes. You know, we talk about the botanical medicine toolbox, we talk about the nutritional medicine toolbox, and we talk about the oncological toolbox as well. And all of those are ways to influence the terrain. But in the oncological level, you know, these are therapies that are built by the, you know, the oncological community, that kind of the industry around cancer, that target the cancer. And then the botanical, lifestyle, diet, and nutritional toolboxes are really about altering the terrain. There are some exceptions, you know, some botanical medicines can target the cancer itself, but we're really talking about two different kind of ways to address cancer. And obviously they work really well together, collaboratively and, you know, synergistically. So this is going to focus in on looking at the terrain, and how I look at the terrain and look at the body as an ecological system, and how we can evaluate, you know, how people are doing, you know, progression and regression, quality of life, but also just what are all the factors that cancer is creating in the body, and what are all the factors that are present in the body that are allowing cancer to proliferate in a person's body. So that's really the theme of this talk. And I wanted to start with kind of a, you know, a concept about what is cancer, and the idea that we don't really know what it is kind of the key, right? We can follow the outward signs, that, you know, the manifestations, but we don't really know what it is. And so, like I said, cancer shows up in the event that there's an altered terrain, right? You know, we see all kinds of things. You know, if you change an ecosystem, what happens? The weeds come up. You know, they're there for a purpose. They have influence. If we change an environment, we put environmental pressure on it, you know, it changes, it mutates. Same in our bodies. Environmental pressures come in. You know, we'll talk about a number of those. The three main ones: the, you know, the stresses in life, especially emotional stress, and then you have the chemical toxins. Then you have the altered food supply. You know, it's like the lack of nutrition. You know, our nutritional deficiencies that are, you know, pretty much ubiquitous now across the world. And all those three things together are, you know, the things that are altering the environment that are allowing cancer to occur. occur. But then cancer also creates a lot of changes that manifest in the human ecosystem, that they start to change the body in a way that supports the cancer and depletes the human body. And that's what I want to kind of focus on. So when I think about, the ecological approach, it's really looking at this sort of, again, macroscopic view where we are not just looking in the microscope and identifying molecules or receptors, single targets. We're not doing that. We're actually taking that information, putting it over here, and then we're looking at the bigger picture, the person, time in their life, their time in space, in seasons, and we're looking at the bigger patterns of life, and we're taking those patterns and cycles and we're identifying how those play out in the human body, and we're basically learning through nature in that macroscopic view. And I always call that the macro ecological perspective. And then we're layering that over what we see in the microscope, where we can identify whether it's immunohistochemistry or if it's polymerase chain reactions, whatever we're studying, we're going to get that micro rational information. And I want to put the two together to create a seamless weave that allows us to have this really broad view of, of the human terrain, so to say. And so one of the things that we get into is this idea that there is, in the host, we have this incredible microbiota population, right? That's super, important to us. And we know now just how influential it is on neurological function. We know how influential it is on immune function. And so when we think about looking at the world around us, we see plants, we see the way that things are interacting with the world. And the microbiota are really this incredibly important weave that allows life to exist. And just like a tree is nestled into the soil, it's not that the soil that the tree is feeding on, it's the microbes, it's the mycorrhizae, it's the fungi, the virome, the archaea that are there that are transforming that dirt, that bed of nutrition into a usable form that the tree then can absorb and assimilate. And the same things happen for us. We're just not sessile. We're not these autotrophs that sit in one place making chemicals to deal with the environment. We're actually taking the soil, right, our food, putting it into our bodies and then walking around with it. And then, and then we just digest it in the same way. But those microbes are living inside the roots that are inside our intestines, right? These villi, these incredibly beautiful columnar epithelial cells that are structured like roots that sit inside the soil, that's the food we took in, to absorb the nutrients. But it's the microbes, it's the microbiota population that's feeding us, not just the food. If we didn't have the microbes, we wouldn't get anything out of it. And so when we think about ecology and we think about the importance of this holistic view, we have to make sure that we're recognizing the importance of those microbes. And that's a key place to work. As we're seeing the new oncological therapies come out, we have the immunotherapies, right? Especially the checkpoint inhibitors. I'm sure people have been talking about these on your, on your podcast here, but they don't work well without a microbiota, a microbiome that is diverse and well established. If it's a weakened microbiota population, the responses that you'll get to an immunotherapy, which of course depends on immune function, right, will be diminished, they'll be inhibited. So we have to focus on that, really importantly. And I put up one quote here when we tie this into cancer. It's from Stephen Paget, and it's the end of the 19th century. And he said, "A plant goes to seed. Its seeds are carried in all directions, but they can only live and grow if they fall on congenial soil." And this is the concept, right? So, how does cancer start? Well, it starts in an ecosystem that supports it. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's there has to be a space for it to exist. Just like an infection, a lot of infections I think of more as microbial imbalances rather than infectious agents. Like suddenly you're walking along and you just had like this, you breathed in a bunch of viruses out in the woods and then you got sick. Well, I don't know if that's really what happened. Like imagine you're out there in the woods, your head got wet, you got cold, you weren't warm at night, you didn't have enough sleeping bag, and you woke up and you were shivering and you had the fever and chills. Well, what happened? Well, the microbes were already there. They were just in control. They were in balance within the microbiota population. So this is important stuff when we're thinking about, microbiota and how we control and infections and things like that. So I said there's two systemic approaches really, and we need systemic approaches to cancer. That's really important. And I'll always, it's really important to me to take a patient, get a hold of them at the earliest stage possible. Obviously prevention is where we can do some of the greatest work we can do. But if someone has a diagnosis of cancer, I want to try to get a hold of them before they start any kind of, radical invasive interventions so that we can start to alter the terrain in a positive way. And so my first step is to address the terrain, okay? And that's strengthening the person. getting rid of the pathological factors, changing the areas that are imbalanced and bringing them back into balance so the person is as strong and healthy as they've ever been. And at the same time, weaken the cancer energy. That's a concept that Donnie always talked about. You know, we weaken the cancer energy and strengthen the host. So we want to do that simultaneously. And then it's, you know, in a lot of cases, it's important that we have a therapy that's directed at the cancer. You know, we need, you know, something. And depending on the cancer, you know, that the type of cancer, the aggressiveness of it, how, you know, what's its mitotic rate? Does it look like it's spreading rapidly? Is it growing really quickly? Are a lot of the cells in mitosis at any given time? Is it very undifferentiated? Does it look way different than the starting tissue? You know, what's the nuclear polymorphism? All these things will show us information about what is this cancer's kind of course. And some cancers they're pretty mellow, they're pretty mild, they're slow. And other ones are fast and they're growing aggressively. And it's always been my opinion and perspective that the therapy should match the disease. You know, we shouldn't take every person with, let's say, oh, you have prostate cancer. Okay, well, we're going to do surgery, followed by radiation, and then we're going to take away your hormones. Whoa, whoa, whoa. There's not one prostate cancer. There's one prostate cancer for every single man. It's unique prostate cancer that it's manifested as a cancer energy inside the unique ecosystem of that man's body. And we have to take that into account. And as we're seeing this long-term data, especially in prostate cancer, which is such a slow growing disease, right? It's very different than a lot of other cancers. We're seeing that the outcomes are, they're basically watched over a long period of time. So if you can actually take a prostate cancer population and watch 10 years, you can watch 20 years. A recent study came out on 23 years, looking at the difference between men who did radical, you know, intervention, you know, prostatectomy, radiation, hormonal therapy, versus men who did watchful waiting, just didn't do anything. And the difference in 23 years was a 2.9 year advantage. Like you basically lived 2.9 years longer out of 23 years if you did nothing. And that's not talking about doing what we do, which is find solutions, dig for answers, you know, apply all kinds of therapies and medicines, right? Which aren't necessarily those radical ones. So anyway, the concept being that we've got to bring together all the pieces. We got to strengthen the host, weaken the cancer. And then a lot of times we might need a targeted therapy. And in these aggressive cancers, and a lot of them are like that, like let's say you get an initial diagnosis of a bladder cancer and you've got it in your bones and you've got it in your lungs. Well, you know, it's probably a really important time if we want to get through this initial, you know, period. If you're in pain and there's lots of coagulation, things are going on, we're probably going to need a therapy that's going to target that thing pretty quickly. And I've had people come to me where they thought they were sick. Oh God, I don't feel good. What's wrong with me? And it's like, you know, with the signs and symptoms you have, you probably have something pretty serious. Let's get some information. You know, you get a CAT scan, you get some blood work, like, whoa, you have cancer. The person's like, oh, I don't think I have cancer. You know, I'm weak. I feel terrible. I'm vomiting every day. It's like, no, you need to see the oncologist right now. Like, this is really important. It's funny how many times I've been the guy, hey, I want you to come heal me with, you know, botanical medicine. And here's this person who's like, you know, they're just emaciated, they're thin, they're pale, they're weak, they've got leukemia. And I'm like, man, I'd love to be able to tell you that I could just give you an herb or snap my fingers and we can cure this thing. But let's be smart. You know, you have a daughter, you have a son, I want you to be alive. I'll support you. We'll make good decisions, but we might need something that's going to kill that cancer, knock it back, and then we can support you through it. And then we have some more options and a little breathing room. And a lot of times it's just that first initial decision to get through with what is my treatment choice. And once you make that choice, commit to it, and then go forward, suddenly we have all kinds of options, you know, and there's lots of different, you know, choices that can be made down the road, especially if we take our time and make good choices. And so my point being that I'm not against chemotherapy or, you know, the oncological toolbox. I just think it has to be used very appropriately. It has to be, you know, has to be an individualized treatment decision that takes in the value of the patient, takes into account the genetics of the tumor, takes into account the state of the human being. Sometimes someone can't handle, you look at their ecosystem, it's so far out of balance, there's no way they're going to be able to handle the, you know, the downstream breakdown products. If you kill the cancer really quickly, they're going to get a tumor lysis syndrome and they could very easily die from it. So again, like that decision making, right? Super important. So I've been talking about the host, right? And the person, this is the person, and strengthening the host. And so some of the concepts that are important, you know, and one of the things that I get into is a conversation piece. It's another one of these esoteric things, right? Life force, right? Is there a life force, you know? And in the kind of quack medicine sites, it's like, oh, people like acupuncturists and chiropractors and naturopaths, they believe in this, this force, right? That, it's like sort of directs the body and all this stuff. It's all kind of woo stuff. But ultimately, what is this organizing force that makes this body, strong? I mean, I look at you and I see a young man who's vital. I can tell you have vitality. You're not pale, you're not wan, your eyes aren't sunken, like there's a lot about you that I can just read instantly with this sensory, tool. I can say, Ryan looks pretty healthy, right? And that's important. And so when we think about the life force, why would your body heal a wound? Why would it heal a cut? How does it, how does it do this job of healing and maintaining itself? That most of us, I think, understand and believe that there is a life force, a strength, a constitutional, fortitude that a body has. And our job as collaborative doctors, we want to make sure that we're supporting that, strengthening the life force of the patient. Does that make sense to you? What do you think about the life force idea?
It does. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I mean, one of my favorite presentations on this event was actually not a presentation. It was more just a regular interview given the subject matter, but it was with Master Ming Tong Gu, a Qigong master. Yeah.
No, always work well. Yep.
Yeah. So we got into the force and we were making Star Wars jokes and all that stuff. But no, that right back to the nature of reality and what is this thing. And the
idea that we support the life force, and there's lots of ways to understand that, to measure that. And at the end of this, I want to just touch on the word chi a little bit, because it's one of those things that's been tagged as, again, this fairy dust idea, like chi. What is chi? Well, we'll talk about it later, because it's an observable phenomena. It's a model. Everything is a model. All models are approximations, right? George E. Box, the statistician in the 1900s, that really just said, guys, a model should be something that is not the thing, but it gives us information about it so that we can apply, something. It's useful to us. It should be simple and it should be useful. Those are like the key principles. And so Qi fits that for me. As a doctor of Chinese medicine, that concept is very useful for me. And it ties into the life force idea. So anyway, so the key things with the host: the central nervous system, the blood sugar and insulin-like growth factors, balancing all the body composition. Hormones are super important. The anabolic and catabolic balance. That's something that a lot of people don't talk about very often, but it's just anabolic is the building up of materials. You take smaller molecules, put them together to build structures. Catabolic is taking big structures and breaking them down into smaller bits. And that's a constant balance in the human body. It's like yin and yang. It's this, building up and breaking down. And that's got to be in balance. And cancer is a catabolic process. It's using resources really rapidly and depleting what's there. I mean, does that have any kind of, association analogically with what's happening in our planet? I'm just going to leave that out there. But so we want to balance anabolic and catabolic, and there's a lot of great agents out there that are anti-catabolic and are anabolic in our botanical medicine toolbox. I don't have time to go into them all here, but that's one of the places that we work, especially when you're in a collaborative context with people that are doing, oncological therapy. So then I also talk about energy efficiency, the mitochondria, ATP, and then I always layer Qi onto that as kind of like, I think of ATP as the physical currency of Qi. It's what we use to take energy and package it so we can use it. Nutrient deficiencies and nutrient imbalances, huge piece of what's going on. And then dietary and lifestyle factors that manifest in the host also are really important. So that's kind of the overview of the host and what I look at. And so, we'll talk about constitution, and we got to have a way to see into the person's body, into the black box, right? This mystery, it's this mysterious thing. We don't, what's going on inside. We have all these different tools of interpretation, from that macroecological perspective down to the micro-rational, put them together, help the person on all levels. So when I think about, I have this slide that I want to put up, and you guys can see it when, when we actually release the slides, but it's just kind of all the physical exam pieces, the tongue and the pulse from Chinese medicine, this observation, everything from, the symmetry of their bodies and looking at the capillary fragility that happens in people's bodies, all the telangiectasias, the spider veins, body mass index, on and on it goes, And there's so many places we can just do in clinic to understand the ecology of the body. And then we want to, again, address all the areas that are out of balance, bring them into balance. So one of the things that this constitutional conversation brings me to is the idea of Chinese medicine. One of the things that I fell in love with early on, well, I'll say two things really. First thing is that this basic concept of Chinese medicine is that there's two sides to everything. That everything that is in this existence that we're seeing is in a dualistic relationship with something else, right? Something is something only because it's not something else. Something is up because something else is down. You know, it's all in relativity. And so Chinese medicine says, well, everything then is basically in this yin and yang relationship, where one thing is yin, meaning that it's softer, it's wetter, it's cooler, it's, you know, whatever there's all these yin concepts relative to something that's hotter and more outward and more kinetic. And this basic thing about yin and yang, that was the fundamental principle of Chinese medicine. You need to understand yin and yang to be able to apply medicine. And so then they break that down into 8 principles. There's 8 principles in Chinese medicine: yin and yang, hot and cold, internal and external, excess and deficiency. That's it. And if you can take a patient, get their intake and understand those 8 principles and apply them and say, oh, this person's condition is yin. It took a long time to develop its slow, steady growth. It's not this yang, outward expression, yellow color, red and infection and pus. That's a yang condition. There's a yin condition. And the person's got, you know, they've got feet, they've got chills, they're cold, their hands and feet are cold. You know, they always want to get warm. They want to drink hot beverages. Okay, they've got a cold thing going on here. So it's a yin and it's a cold thing. And then this has been going on for a long time. They have bowel changes, they've got abdominal stuff. This is an internal condition. It's not something they got from outside. And then let's say, oh, well, this person is, you know, they're really weak. They sleep a lot. They get fatigued after a little bit of exercise. Their mental fogginess. Okay, so they're deficient. So now I've got, you know, out of those 8 principles, I just put them in this side that says they're yin, they're cold, they're deficient, and it's internal. Great. Now I've got a little bit of a roadmap to work from as far as choosing what my therapies are, right? It seems, you know, simple or archaic. But again, like I said, I love simple. I love archaic. You know, Ken Wilber always talked about the human consciousness evolution, right? You go from the archaic to the mythic, or sorry, to the magical, archaic to magical to mythic to rational. And we're in the rational period now. And then the next step, of course, is transrational and then non-dual. Well, you know, I like to say that we need to recapitulate all of the human evolutionary steps, how our mind has evolved. We need to be archaic, magical, mythical, and rational together, and transrational. But it's not like we just, now that we're in the rational, all of that we did to get us here is meaningless. It's not. Traditional medicine that was built on those other principles is still extremely valuable. So let's talk about cancer. I talked about the host, right? So in the cancer, those big, I want to hit a few of the key ecological changes that take place, the internal biological terrain changes. And the first one is hypercoagulation and blood stagnation. I want to hit this one really hard because that's really important. The next one is oxidative damage and reactive oxygen species, and just that generation that causes, you know, free radicals to lead to damage, right? Leads to breakdown of structures and tissues, and more breakdown leads to more errors and more potential for mutation. Inflammation, we all know it's a huge part of it. You know, the little fires burning throughout our bodies, it causes problems. We need to get inflammation under control, and cancer loves inflammation. Cancer loves hypercoagulation and blood stagnation because it generates it all the time. I want to talk about lactate, serum lactate, and there's a really important relationship between the stroma, the structure around the cancer, and the tumor microenvironment, and the production of lactic acid as a byproduct from the, you know, metabolism of sugar. It makes lactic acid, and that lactic acid is toxic to the human body. You know, it's the same stuff that we build in our bodies when we, you know, go through a heavy bout of exercise and our muscles break down and we need to use an anaerobic, oxygen-free energy generation system. Well, it makes lactic acid, and then you get that burn in your muscles. Well, cancer is doing that all the time. And that lactic acid actually changes the ecosystem, the terrain around the tumor, and it inhibits all kinds of functions. So I want to look at that. And angiogenesis, the development of new blood vessels, a big part of what cancer does. You know, it's a coagulopathy. It's this crazed blood vessel network that's just totally disorganized. Growth factors, you know, everything from fibroblast growth factors to insulin-like growth factors, and then into the signal transduction and receptor pathways, like the human epidermal growth factor receptor, like the epidermal growth factor receptor domain, like, you know, the hormonal stuff. You know, we get into the way that the signals come from different hormones in the body. All these are places that we can analyze looking at the blood, the plasma, or the serum, or you can look at the urine or saliva. But these are going to give us big clues as to how things are happening in the body, what the ecology looks like, and how we can target it, how we can alter it. Okay.
Yeah, the yin and yang in particular. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, cool. Well,
basic, you know, but really good to keep in
exactly.
mind. Yeah.
Keep that in mind. I always try to say, like, we can look at the microscope and we can get all that microscopic information. We can look at molecules, and we don't really look at molecules. We can understand them and relate to them and understand how they function. But when we do that, we don't want to lose this perspective. the yin and yang perspective, the macroecological perspective. Keep applying those principles that we see repeated in nature into the microscope. And I just try to keep, quality is important, not just quantity, not, it's all about, in Chinese medicine, it's all about function, right? Not so much about the form and the structure, but about what is the functional quality. And that's what qi comes down to. It's the functional qualities. So when we look at the internal terrain, we want to modulate it, right? We want to help the body get it in a place of balance. And I always talk about how there's like a dynamic range that the body has that it can kind of maintain stability. Well, a lot of times we get outside of that range. We're out here, and that's when we need some help. Get the body back into this place. And in here, the body does great. It can adjust the changes. But when it gets too far out, that's when the body starts to break down. So identifying the areas that are out of balance, establish baselines. When you're looking at labs, we're going to talk about a bunch of things that I like to run. Looking at the coagulation picture, for example, if I see that a fibrinogen level, it's a precursor to the fibrin formation, and their D-dimer, the peptide that's cleaved during clotting, if those are highly elevated, well, let's target those, and I'll target them with, enzymes, botanical medicines. Sometimes we'll recommend some pharmaceuticals. We'll get that stuff under control, and it's normalized. Now we know that we've done a great job. And the person's in a better, ecological state. And then over time, if those numbers start to climb and they were high when you had active cancer, it's another indication that the cancer itself is progressing. And I do that by taking many of these markers. If I have 5 different areas and I'm looking at them and the person's like, well, do you think the therapy is working or not? Well, you know what? All 5 of these areas show me that the disease is progressing. That's really powerful, information to help us understand what's going on. And you want to put together, again, it's a big puzzle, lots of pieces, not just one marker.
Very good.
So, yeah, I've got some slides, that I want to share with the kind of go over like what is the internal biological terrain. And from the biomedical side of it, like I mentioned, there's hypercoagulation, inflammation, metabolic disorders, the hepatobiliary, dysfunction and congestion that happens there, lymphatic congestion. We have things like redox coupling and the redox cycling network that can get broken down. We've got imbalances in the complete blood count, differences in the way the immune system's set up, anemia, neutropenia, thrombocytopenia, neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio imbalances. That's all the biomedical stuff for internal biological terrain, kind of overview on what I like to see. And then the other side of it, you have Chinese medicine, which we call these pathological factors: blood stagnation, heat, damp heat, and heat toxins, phlegm, and sticky stuff and turbid fluids, dampness in the body, liver stagnation in the san jiao, the triple warmer, which is sort of like the lymph system from the Chinese perspective, a deficiency in the ability of the body to quench, like yin deficiency, not being able to quench free radicals and cool down things, deficiencies in organ networks, and deficiencies in essential substances and nutrients. So there's a nice overlay there. Now, like I said, there's a good slide to help you guys see that. Hopefully you can take a look at that. And I also have a nice kind of a couple slides that overview what are the biomarkers that relate to what we're talking about. And with the health of the patient, there's the things like the CBC, like I mentioned, and that neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. It's really important because cancer, this is an important piece, is that cancer is us. It's not something other. It's our tissue. It's our cells. It has all the same tools that we have. So why doesn't the immune system see it? Well, because it says it's me. The immune system says, hey, what are you guys doing over here? Why are you building this big structure over here? Why is there all this inflammation and this? What's going on? Here, I got the major histopathologic complex right here. We're good. Look, I'm you. And by the way, I need you to come help me build this thing. So can we get some neutrophils in here? We need some fibroblasts. I'm trying to build some structures. Can you send some troops in here? And they're like, okay, here you go. Boom, boom, boom. So pretty soon the cancer, and this is recently they showed that 50% of the weight of a solid tumor is oftentimes made up of immune cells that are working for the cancer. They're not breaking it down. They don't know it's cancer. So that's really important. So that neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio is important because the neutrophils often get hijacked. They become tumor-associated neutrophils. There's tumor-associated macrophages, tumor-associated fibroblasts. These are guys that are no longer working on the good guys team, but they're working on the cancer team, And so we look at that number. That's another way to follow progression regression. If that ratio gets skewed, that's a pretty good indication. It's not your immune system kicking butt when those neutrophils are high. It's your body donating neutrophils to the wrong cause. So the complete metabolic, panel is looking at all of the nutrients, looking at minerals, looking at all the different functional, qualities of the organs, looking at glucose and insulin, like hemoglobin A1C, You know, looking at vitamin D levels, I always do vitamin D, the 25-OH, the storage form, and then the 1,25-dihydroxy to see how the conversion is happening. And, you know, in sarcoid conditions or, you know, leukemias, lymphomas, definitely look at both, because you can think that vitamin D level is low and needs to be built up, but they might have actually a lot of 125 already there activating the immune system, in which case you don't want to give them a bunch of vitamin D and then push them into a hyper, you know, vitamin D level, which creates hypercalcemia and other problems. You know, cholesterol panel, look at the cholesterol, do the VAP, you know, the vertical analog profile, the VAP test, definitely way better than the old, just look at the, you know, low density, high density lipids. The urine pH, and I'm going to talk about lactate and urine pH, it's really important. And then the hormones, you know, looking at estradiol and estrone sulfate reservoirs where the body sometimes stores hormones. People don't often run estrone sulfate, but it's one that Donnie told me about. You could have a normal estradiol level, but then this estrone sulfate is just super high off the charts. Your body's stashing the estrogen in this other form and then using it. And so you can identify things like that. Progesterone, the thyroid hormones, the whole thyroid panel, testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, sex hormone binding globulin, prolactin, DHEA sulfate, the cortisol levels, always do the 24-hour, leptin. And then we have things like hormone metabolite tests, like the Dutch test is a really great one. It looks at a 24-hour urine test. You take 4 different samples, look at what's coming out of the body, what kind of metabolites, that's important. And estrogen metabolism, you can do that too. There's a couple labs that just run, you know, what kind of estrogens? Are they methylated? Are they hydroxylated? What are you making out of it? And I always think it's really important when it comes to hormones. It was like, you know, people just like, oh yeah, you know, you need some hormones, so you give people hormones. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Did you analyze where those hormones are going in that person? Because I always think of it as like a pachinko game, you know, the game where you put the little ball in and it goes down and hits a bunch of little, you know, pegs, ding, 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 and it comes out somewhere. Well, those little pegs are enzyme systems. And if you put a precursor hormone up here, in each person, it's going to end up at a different chute at the bottom. And if I don't know what's happening for that person, I could just be giving them just straight, you know, the wrong stuff. It could just be becoming, you know, the hormone we don't want. So for me, it feels like it's a responsible thing to do to follow those levels in patients who are taking hormones. And I can't tell you how many patients I've had that, you know, had breast cancer or ovarian or endometrial cancer who were on hormones, you know, for many years, especially in the menopausal periods, and then got cancer and then immediately were pulled off the hormones, you know, and don't ever take these. And then finally, we do have studies that show that, you know, there is a direct connection, especially some hormones more than others, towards cancers. But I think that's just, again, analyzing the metabolites. And then I always look at nutrients. You know, I was doing an iron study, and we look at zinc and magnesium, talked about vitamin D, you know, for B vitamins, like looking at the methylmalonic acid to understand vitamin B12, and then like a Nutra-Eval, like that kind of test that sort of look, what's the nutrient status of the red blood cells? That's a good stuff that we can help, you know, to understand the host. And then I've got a whole bunch of stuff related to the cancer. And, you know, I broke down the hypercoagulation into a few pieces. The first one is fibrinogen, and the second one is D-dimer. And then there's plasminogen activator inhibitor. And then there's factor V Leiden, which is a genetic factor that some people have that predisposes them to clots. And there's some others too. But I'm going to talk about those in a little more in depth because I want to go through some details about those. And then I talk about inflammation. You know, that's a big one. And we've got the, you know, your SED rate, your HSCRP. There's a bunch of great inflammatory pathways to check, like interleukin-6, very much tied to progression of disease, both autoimmunity and cancer, and COVID for that matter. Ferritin, you know, the iron storage protein, that's an acute phase reactant. Some of these nutrients are obviously get highly upregulated in inflammatory states, and you always want to differentiate that. And you do that by looking at multiple markers so you can interpret what it means, you know. I look at the glycolysis and the acidosis stuff, like that's the lactic acid dehydrogenase and serum lactate. I'm going to talk about those and how we can adjust that as a key part of terrain. Bone turnover levels, angiogenesis markers like interleukin-8, and I'm going to talk about ceruloplasmin, the tissue storage form of copper, because there's a huge tie between copper and angiogenesis, and I'll get into that later too. And you know, copper is one of those nutrients that we don't really talk about that much, but in cancer, I would never give somebody copper if they had an active cancer unless I knew why I was giving it to them and I had some other therapies in place. Same thing with iron. Same thing with sugar. You know, some things you just don't give. Like I wouldn't give glutamine in huge doses in a patient that wasn't being treated. Of course, small doses are great. There's a lot of these little controversies that come up that you just dig and dig and dig and talk to people, and eventually you form your own opinion. You know, and Donnie trained me at an early stage in my development, like, you know, don't take anybody's opinion. Don't look at any paper and think that's the answer. You need to dig. You want to understand folic acid in cancer? Well, here's 36 papers. I want you to read these. You know, when you finish them and you have an opinion, come back and talk to me. You know, and do that with like every single thing, it's what you have to do. Anyway, so special tests for cancer, like circulating tumor cells, that's been a big one. People really had a lot of, really hope that we could use these circulating tumor cell analyses to identify disease progression, regression, hopefully, find out, do I have cancer? But they don't really, it doesn't turn out that way. The CTCs aren't as useful. They don't get shed most of the time until there's a bigger tumor, where the tumor is large enough that you're starting to see that the circulating cells are really kind of out there, a lot of seeds, and you can pick them up. Occasionally you'll find them in, early stage disease, but they're not as useful that way. It is a great way to follow progression, because if those numbers go down, it's a good sign, right? But more importantly, recently we've had these, what are called the tumor cell DNA, the ctDNA, and then the CF, the cell-free DNA. And they're pieces of DNA that basically get broken open when the tumor cells are lysing, because tumors just constantly, stuff is dying, it's necrotic, it's anaerobic, it's sticky, it's, and there's stuff dying all the time. And the pieces of DNA that circulate are picked up now by little nanoprobes that we have technology that helps us understand how much of them are in a unit of blood. And then we can also start to take that and look at what are they made of? What are the genes that are being overexpressed? Things like the IV gene test, like Biocept, the Guardant 360. These are all tests that I love to follow, because the more of that DNA that's present, the more tumor burden there is. And the less of it is, the less tumor burden. Good way to follow things in patients.
It was interesting at the at the last OnGANP meeting that I was at, conference. There was the CTC test, the sponsors, the booths all across. There was the CTC table on, what's that?
Cell Search, was that because they have the approved, they have like prostate, breast, and colon approval.
Yeah,
Cell Search, maybe.
Gosh, and now I can't remember. I know Biocept was one of them, but I don't know. It was just, the ones that were testing for CTCs were over here, and the ones that were testing for ctDNA were over here. And then I was asking them about, what the difference, and of course they all had like, you can't trust that because this, and that. They each
right.
each have their own things to say about the other kind. I'm sure there's value in both, but it was just
I think it's about timing and application. What are you looking for? And with most of these tests, that's what it comes down to. They have application, but just it's not probably as broad as we want it to be. We're always looking for a silver bullet, a cure for cancer. There's no cure for cancer. Cancer's a million diseases. I think you saw one of the talks I listened to last year. I can't remember who it was, but it was very much there is no cancer. That was the concept. There is like just this manifestation of disease that's different and unique in every person. I have to say I agree with that 100%. Definitely. And then there's a whole bunch of tumor markers that I put up there. All these markers that like the CA125 and CA19-9 and CEA, CA15-3, CA27. They're all just markers that they're basically proteins that are shed by the cancer that can be picked up again by our technology, and we can say, oh, this is related to the cancer. And if that's inclining, the cancer is probably progressing, and if it's declining, it's regressing. Of course, it gets tricky when you have cell damaging therapies like chemotherapies, because if you damage the tissue, then the tissue is going to break down and you're going to release the tumor, those proteins, right? So it's tricky for oncologists to follow those numbers. That's why I like to use multiple markers, looking at many aspects of the terrain as a complete picture, so you can predict outcomes a lot better that way than relying on one thing. So let's talk about how we target some of these areas. And the first place I want to go is with the stress response, because, it was years ago that I realized that the stress response and stress is probably, it could be the #1 target. It could be the most important piece of the whole cancer formation, diagnosis, and treatment. It's remarkable. And you think about the stress axis, right? And you've got the HPA, and I'm 17 years into my study of adaptogens and the HPA axis. I mean, it's huge. Donnie's like, he's literally written the book on it. And, you get into cortisol and DHEA, and then the relationship of cortisol and epinephrine, norepinephrine, the stress hormones, and that whole axis, the neuroendocrine system, and how its function is tied to our stress response and how we feel and what we think and the things that happen to us, how we respond to those. And then that changes all kinds of aspects about our physiology. And so it's just become really important. And there's a key piece in cancer is this beta adrenergic system, where the heart has these beta adrenergic receptors, the vasculature, that receives information from catecholamines, these stimulating neurotransmitters that drive us to go into the fight or flight response. And when we do that, when we upregulate the beta adrenergic system, we find that there's immune dysregulation, there's endocrine disharmony, there's a breakdown in a lot of structures, because it's not a system that's meant to be on long term. It's a system that's there to try to get us over some kind of a stressful event that's happening now. And we've seen a lot of research now that shows that people who are under stress, a good example is like shift workers, for example, who they constantly are flipping from sleeping at night to sleeping in the day, to working in the day to working at night. And that flipping back and forth is really hard on that HPA axis. Now you've got to adapt to this entirely different cycle over and over again. And those people tend to have more cancer. And it's a really interesting thing, but it's just one of those really key tie-ins with stress and cancer. And then, the idea of this beta adrenergic system, there's a bunch of research that's been done recently. It's been coming out. The first two studies were on breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Both studies took groups that were treated for active cancer, and then took people that were treated for active cancer and were given a beta blocker. And they did this over 5 years. And they looked at the outcomes. And the people that had the beta blocker, they had less rates of recurrence. They had less aggressive recurrences. They had better outcomes regarding to follow-up treatments. And these are some hard endpoints, like, overall survival was improved in people who took beta blockers. That's pretty profound. So I'm not saying that everybody out there needs to take a beta blocker, but it shows us that targeting that system is really, really important. And we can do that so well. And I've got a nice slide that I'm going to show you about, stress relieving techniques, how we can calm the central nervous system ourselves. And I'll just say that even with, some of the stuff that Wim Hof, the Iceman, got into, right, about his breathing techniques, one of the things that he's been able to show is that we can alter the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, which was thought that it just ran on its own. But now we've shown, actually, and through some of the research that he kind of pioneered, we can influence autonomic nervous system function by changing the way that we do things, the way we breathe, the way we think, the way we, either meditate or be active. So this is important stuff. And it gets back to the vagus nerve, right? And this vagal, afferent, efferent, this means basically vagal signals coming from the gut going to the brain, and from the brain go back to the gut. This is how we feel it, how we metabolize the life experience. We have an experience, we feel it in our gut, right? It's like that whole thing, I feel it. And then you get, interpretation from the brain when that signal goes up to the brain, and then you have all these responses that come, and we filter that information into our interpretation. That's language and history and culture, all the things that make us up. But the experience is happening in our gut, and it's happening, it's associated with the microbes, it's associating with this whole idea. And I always say there's this, we're digesting life chemically, but we're digesting life emotionally. And it's all happening relative to the gut and the hormones and the nerves, the neuroendocrine system, et cetera. And all that is deeply, deeply influential on the immune function. And one of the things that we see when people are calm, when they have a good vagal response, is that they start having more heart rate variability, right? And heart rate variability is one of these things that shows that people who have this really good variation in their heart rate over time, they start to have a more resilient, more adaptive network, and they're able to overcome disease a lot easier than people who aren't. And that's really important. And one of the simplest ways you can alter that is just slow breathing, just 3 to 6 breaths per minute, where you can get your breath down to that state. You can activate the vagal nerve. And again, that's that parasympathetic. And I've got a slide that's kind of shows how the relationship between the parasympathetic and sympathetic is really like a yin and yang pair. And they're not opposing systems. They're synergistic systems that support each other, where the whole parasympathetic rest and digest, the yin aspect, is in perfect balance with the sympathetic, the address the stress response system. And they're just playing this beautiful music together, And that's where I'll just jump right into that, heart rate variability is influenced by a lot of these great techniques. You can get it up with, doing all kinds of different meditation, yoga, qigong, all those kind of things, but music as well. And music is one of those things that I'm a musician, have been for the last 25 years. It's been in my family. It's something that I do to make sure that I feel okay every day. Like when I'm, especially working with cancer patients day in and day out, like this morning, I just got off the phone with a woman who was just so amazing. Her husband just died a week and a half ago after a heck of a journey we went through, and just being on the phone with her and sharing the emotional experience. It's not, I don't work with people, talk to them on the phone, go deep into their, this life and death conversation. And then, everybody's in tears and this is a big deal. I don't just put the phone down and I'm, oh, hey, how's it going? Let's go. It's like, no, I mean, it's with me, there's an emotional experience that I'm sharing with these people that I'm working with, and it's profound. And, just this morning, I had that experience, and it was just a beautiful conversation. But this is not easy stuff. This is life and death, and everybody's at a different place with it, right? But I'll tell you, the music, it just like when I get to that place where I can just play, and I'm a drummer, trained and studied as a drummer, all kinds of music from around the world, and I just, man, it does something. It changes my heart, changes my mind, allows me to just settle. The two things, nature and music, those are the two things that I think that, they allow me to keep doing this work. I don't know that I could do it every day without having those places where I can just check in and really be free of my mind and the thoughts and the emotion, trauma.
Yeah, we've always seen music as just kind of a no-brainer when you,
yeah, right.
When you take into account all the stress or anti-stress benefits, I guess you could say, and
yeah,
the vibration, you get into all that stuff. And
I was going to say, I've got another list, a slide of like activities to enhance the immune function, and it's everything like the cold immersion stuff, the stuff that Wim Hof's doing is really powerful. Getting into cold and just really accepting it and being with it, it's great. Yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong, the art therapy, following your passion. Like for me, it's music and it's nature. Those are my passions. I just need those things. And if I do them, I feel great. My body's calm, my mind's calm, my breathing is deeper. And I just try to encourage a lot of patients. I'm like, well, what do you do for art? Well, I used to paint, but I don't really do. Hey, let's get some paints. I want you to paint, and it's remarkable what will happen is someone just gets out there and starts painting and just, oh man, just like putting your passion out there in the world is a huge part of calming that vagal nerve response, or I should say upregulating the vagal nerve response, calming the central nervous system, and keeping people in a much healthier place. So follow your passions, absolutely. And sensual intimacy, and I have to say right now, it's just really hard, that the sensual part of and it's everything from just being with friends and family, all of it, to the close cuddling and hugging, all that. It's all really deeply powerful and profound. And social isolation has been shown as a huge risk factor in all disease, but in cancer especially. So I really hope we can get through this current thing soon, because, there's a lot of problems that come from this. So, okay, on to the next thing. So I talked about targeting blood stagnation, and Chinese medicine has always looked at tumors, even since the first early writings that were like on stone tablets. It was like, the people were found with tumors. It was pretty rare, but it happened. And mostly in these overpopulated areas, of course. And you have these identifications of what they call blood stagnation. And blood stagnation is an ancient concept in Chinese medicine. It literally means that the blood in that area is not flowing easily. It's being, it's more stagnant. And a great place to see that is where you get a bruise. Someone hits something, you break some blood vessels, the blood extravasates, it sits in that area, it turns purple, then it turns yellow. The blood is stagnating there. The blood's not flowing out of those tissues. And so they kind of, an extreme form of blood stagnation, blood stasis, is cancer. And so there's this sort of heuristic that, blood stagnation and cancers go hand in hand. Well, and I'll tell you, the research shows really clearly that, cancer patients are at a 7 to 10 times the risk of having a clot if you have a cancer. That's just undisputed. And there's a lot of people out there who would argue that most patients who have, at least an evolved cancer should have some kind of an anticoagulant therapy in place. And for me, that means, using different tools. And I'm going to talk about some of those tools from the, kind of botanical medicine side of things. But when we look at the coagulation picture, one of the things about the biological terrain is that people who have cancers will have upregulated fibrinogen. They'll have upregulated D-dimer, that peptide that's cleaved during the breakdown of a clot. Every time your body breaks down a clot, it breaks it into these little components. And there's a peptide called D-dimer that's released, that's broken off. Just like when you make insulin, you make a peptide called C-peptide. But our body has these processes and you can measure it. So D-dimer is the rate of clot turnover. How many clots are being formed and broken down? Fibrinogen is the precursor to fibrin, which is the fibrous material that links into the platelets to make a clot. You follow those numbers, and as cancer evolves and grows in a person, almost invariably those numbers go up. So we target that area. I want to get those things controlled down. I want to control that. The cancer ecosystem is, fighting against the human ecosystem. There's also something called plasminogen activator inhibitor. It inhibits the formation of plasmin, which breaks down the fibrin. So again, all these things are, tied together, and platelets are a big part of this also. In some cancers, platelets rising is a big indicator that disease is progressing. So the relevant lab tests that I like to look at is that fibrinogen, the D-dimer, the PAI1, and then inflammatory markers, because all the things I talked about, the C-reactive protein, the sedimentation rate, the interleukin-6, something like ferritin or ceruloplasmin, acute phase mediators, they all get involved in this hypercoagulatory state, and the two things are tied together. So in cancer, basically, the bottom line is that the coagulation systems are activated with cancer, and cancer has been termed a coagulopathy. Okay, it's documented in virtually all cancer types. Cancer and coagulation are just very tied. So even though it is a heuristic from Chinese medicine, it's really accurate. So the four main enzymes that I like to use, I didn't include wovenzime in this, but that's another one. But they're nattokinase, which comes from the soy, the miso, the natto miso. And then there's lumbrokinase, and kinase means, an enzyme. So lumbrokinase, which comes from the lumbricals, which are the earthworms. And then bromelain, which comes from pineapples. And serrapeptase. Serrapeptase comes from actually silkworms, but they're from silkworm colonies that have been diseased with a certain fungus that generates the serrapeptase. And they all have different, specific actions. You could just sort of use them all, but I generally use them in more specific ways. Lumbrokinase, I'll talk about, it's the most powerful enzyme for digesting fibrin in cancer. And lumbrokinase is more specific for breaking down fibrin by turning on the plasminogen. Like I said, there's that plasminogen activator inhibitor. Cancer secretes that. It inhibits the breakdown of the clots. It wants the blood to be sticky, less oxygenated, better for glycolysis, better for cancer's processes than for, normal human stuff. So that's where I always say, if we can digest that material, break it down. Also, there's a cloaking that happens around the cancer where the cancer shields itself in a fibrous web. Eating away at that will help expose it to the immune system. So, it has multiple actions, but lumbro is really the most powerful of the enzymes for digesting the fibrin and clotting effects associated with cancer itself. So, there's actually a really cool trial that's that's right now with a nab-paclitaxel with Abraxane, and they put the two things together, and then basically looking for a fibrin digesting effect with the chemotherapy that's target specific, and then getting a more profound result. So they're in the pretty deep trials in that. So that's pretty cool, just to show that, lumbrokinase is so powerful that clinical trials have started supporting it, and they're making a drug that could be profitable out of it. Just again, not that I want to support more of that research. I already know lumbrokinase works, but it's good to see that there's some, clinical evidence that it's working and scientific evidence. I put up some research papers for people just to check out lumbrokinase. Bromelain, a little bit different, comes from the pineapple. Don't eat pineapples if you have cancer. They're just so full of sugar, but the extracted bromelain is great. I am into some fruits, berries are really good, things that have a low glycemic index, but I generally try to have people stay away from, lots of bananas and pineapples, just really sweet fruits that are too much sugar. Because like I said, cancer is a very glycolytic disease, right? It loves sugar. That's how it produces energy. And it doesn't do well with fats. That's where the ketogenic diet thing comes in. Fasting, it doesn't do well. So, again, minimizing sugar is important. But the bromelain point is that it has more of an anti-edematous, kind of action, where it kind of breaks down sort of the fluid that surrounds tumors. It's also fibrinolytic, breaks down the fibrin, but it's a little more specific. Again, I use oftentimes bromelain and lumbro together for swellings and things associated with tumors, and then the lumbro to eat away at the, I see those markers, I see the D-dimer, the fibrinogen, the PAI1 elevated in the blood, and I start targeting with lumbro and natto, maybe some bromelain, and then those numbers come down. It's really nice. Even if the cancer is not fully controlled, it'll still start to bring down those numbers. And what you're doing is you're having an anti-cancer effect, but you're also, preventing the person from having a stroke. And there's some research recently on this kind of comparing, because there's some doctors out there that believe that every patient that has advanced cancer should just be on anticoagulant therapy, be on something like heparin. A lot of people are thinking just put people on heparin because they're at risk of a stroke, and it's going to be better for the patient and for the environment if there's not as much clotting. Well, they just did a study between Eliquis and heparin, and apparently Eliquis outperformed heparin. I heard that from a doctor in New York City, William Grace, really great oncologist there at Lenox Hill, but he was telling me that was one of the cases. And so giving people anticoagulants is something that, it's not out of the picture, even for somebody who's a more standard kind of approach oncologist. Nattokinase, I was saying, is also kind of resembles plasmin, so it helps break down fibrin in the blood. So that's kind of those things. I also kind of wanted, there was a paper that came out some years ago called Bugs as Drugs, and it kind of talked about, the different things like the worms and leeches and scorpions and things. But the leeches are really interesting because they have a molecule in them. They're called Hirudo, that's their genus name. And the hirudins are a complex of heparin-like molecules that break down blood stagnation, right? So in Chinese medicine, it's a chief herb for, breaking up blood stagnation, removing stasis. But as we see it, it's full of these heparin-rich molecules that actually would inhibit coagulation and inhibit clotting very specifically. So there's that, that again, macroecological. We learned that the leeches do this. How do we learn that? Well, because they suck blood. When they suck the blood, they release these molecules that prevent the blood from clotting, so they can keep eating, sucking the blood. And then so if you take them internally, you get those molecules and you keep the blood from clotting. Just interesting stuff how we figure these things out. There's so much that we've learned through empirical, observation, that I'm so glad to see it hitting the research level. And then in Chinese medicine and just in botanical medicine in general, I'll just finish this. There's tons of great botanicals that will eat up the fibrin, that will change the clotting factors and break up the stagnation.
I chuckled when I was going through it. I was going through your slides before, and I saw the leeches. You had all this all this scientific information, all these references, and all this stuff, and then we're bringing it back to the dark ages and leeches.
Let's bring leeches to the common, to the modern age, because they have a purpose. Again, it's just right application. Bloodletting is, and Chinese medicine has a bloodletting philosophy, but you know what it is? It's like in acupuncture, you take a lancet and you go to the end of a meridian and you drain out a couple drops of blood. That's bloodletting. I don't know how we got to draining out, liters of blood. That's, another conversation. But I want to talk about surgery a little bit, because when we talk about hypercoagulation, one of the issues with surgery, and why I really encourage people to talk to somebody like me, or like any number of people who are on your podcast, on your show, because you want to make some changes in your ecosystem before you jump into something like surgery. So let's say that your cancer is very hypercoagulatory, it's very inflammatory, and now you've got lots of inflammatory mediators, you've got lots of coagulation byproducts in your body, and you're kind of at risk already of clotting and problems, and then you're going to go in and do surgery, right? Well, surgery, what's it going to do? Well, I mean, it's a huge amount of stagnant blood, right? You're causing a ton of damage to tissue, which results in what? A lot of clotting that's going to happen. A lot of growth factors are going to be released. A lot of inflammation is going to be, upregulated to bring about the healing from the surgery. So what I always tell people is like, let's look at your coagulating factors. Let's get them under control with all the different methods we talked about. Then you're ready for surgery, and you're not going to have so much of these downstream problems because the ecosystem's ready to handle it. That's really important, to get a hold of somebody before the intervention so you can control the terrain. Then your outcomes will be so much better. We know that surgery induces hypercoagulation, all that fibrin formation, all those growth factors. You've got vascular endothelial growth factors coming out to help the vasculature. Cancer can hijack that. So if you have cancer in other areas, or if there's cancer remaining, you can really push the cancer to grow. So I want to be careful with surgery. I'm not saying surgery is bad or good. Like, again, any medicine is medicine, and the right application, it's the right tool. But even the anesthesia part of it, there's a lot of cost there. It's very immune inhibiting. It's very suppressive to natural killer cells. So we want to do this in a way that's really thoughtful and not just jump into things. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. And I've listened to some of your talks, and you talk about your journey with your son as well. And, taking a mindful approach, a thoughtful approach when you get a cancer diagnosis is so important. It's really rare that the cancer just evolved so quickly, like an acute leukemia that's rushing into its, that like a yawn condition like that, that's going to need some kind of, really immediate approach. But most cancers, it took them a long time to develop. A lot of times it's 10 years or more to get to that point where you have a, just an observable tumor. Like Dr. McKee says, if you can see it, it's like 1 billion cells there. Yeah. It's evolved a long time. The doubling time is a long time to get there for most tumors. So don't rush. Take your time. Go talk to somebody, get some multiple opinions, and get a collaborative team together to help make good decisions and make some approaches, And that's my point on that one. But so surgery, it in the wrong context can spread cancer. There's just a lot of data that way. And you go back to like the work of Eli Jones, right? Great cancer specialist, 1800s. After 40 years of surgery, his quote is that like, I don't cut tumors out. I just see the disease spread all over people's bodies. And again, if you don't know whether that cancer is an aggressive one that's going to spread, you don't know if surgery is a good option.
I need to open a Pandora's box, but and I don't and I don't really have any, I don't know, or a really good way to frame this question that would lead to a productive answer. But as I've heard, because that was my concern from day one. I stumbled upon that. That research, that theory, hypothesis, whatever amalgamation of things that is. But then I've also spoken with integrative, fairly holistic doctors that say that they've dug through the research and that just it's not there. that surgery would that would spread. I don't know what to really ask you to make of that kind of random statement from a nameless person, but it's just I don't know. It certainly makes sense to me, but
Well, there's, again, there's all these controversies in cancer care. And like I said, all you can do is go through all the clinical experience of the people that you trust and that you know, your teachers, the textbooks, and then go through the clinical data, the research, the scientific research, just go through the literature and make your own opinion about it. But when you put it all together, I think, again, it's context specific. I think that we need to be able to, and I don't want to make any general statements. I'm not making a statement that surgery is bad, that surgery is going to spread cancer. I'm saying that surgery can spread cancer. And again, it's about context. If, imagine if the whole body is already just on fire and it's, it's inflamed and it's got oxidative damage, it's occurring at high levels, and, and it's really unstable. Doing something that further destabilizes it has the potential to wreak further havoc, and especially if there's already cancer in other areas. Now, I don't know if you remember, there was a big thing that came out about 2008. It was Ralph Moss. Love that. You love his work. Did such a great job of just pulling together information. And he was basically saying that not only in tumors, but in organs in our bodies, there are cells that are circulating. And like you have some kidney cells in your lungs, you have other cells in other organs. And he was saying that this is all, he brought all this research, and I read the research. And he said that in tumors, what happens is there's a seeding where the tumor releases these circulating endothelial cells, circulating tumor cells that have the potential to invade and migrate, right? To migrate to another area and to invade tissue to set up a metastatic colony of tumor cells. They have that potential, but that they don't. That just because you have circulating tumor cells doesn't mean you have another cancer. It means that there's the possibility, the propensity to have it. So then the question was, well, what happens if you surgically remove the primary tumor? And what he did is he said, and this was some data, like I said, 2008, you have to look it up, but if you pull that primary tumor out, the seeds now go and look for a place to set up camp. When he was saying that this research, there was an inhibitory signal from the tumor that said, no, that the primary tumor is good. We've already got incredible growth here. We don't need to extend out to this other area. Now, what's interesting is that when I was doing a presentation for Indani, maybe 8 years ago, he said, hey, you're going to cover surgery on this one. So I was like, oh, wow. And we had a whole section on surgery, and does surgery promote cancer? Because it's this huge controversy, right? And so then the concept that came to me was I started looking at the data in animal models. And I was basically looking at the materials and methods used by a number of studies that developed stage 4 cancer models in animals. So you took a mouse, and what they did is they took a mouse and they took an immortalized tumor cell line that was cultured. And they said, okay, it's a lung cancer. And they took a lung cancer that they knew had a very aggressive phenotype, right? This is a lung cancer that was rapidly spreading and that would grow and spread really quickly in the body. So they already knew it was aggressive. So they put it into the animal. Once they let it establish itself in the animal. And then to get to the metastatic place really quickly, they removed the primary tumor. And then the disease went boom, all over their body within a couple of weeks. And I was like, whoa, nobody's talking about that, but that's in the materials and methods in this surgical research. And so I started saying, well, again, I'm not saying that surgery causes cancer, but I know with the right context, the right type of cancer in the wrong type of environment, I'll leave it at that.
Not a Pandora's box at all. Then that was the great follow-up. Thank you for that.
Oh no, thanks so much. I you can't help but just go through these controversies. There's just so many of them. I mean, oxidation, antioxidants with cancer. Phytoestrogens in cancer, glutamine in cancer, folic acid in cancer. They just goes on and on. Anyway, I've got answers, but they're all my answers. So, we have a lot of great ways to modulate inflammation. Inflammation is a big driver of cancer. It's also a way that cancer resists a lot of things. Like if people are doing treatment with chemotherapy and immunotherapy, anything else, you've got to control inflammation. And it's really important because inflammation actually starts to inhibit the ability to get the medications into the tumor cells. It starts to decrease their efficacy. And then inflammation drives, all this sort of tumor-related metabolic activity. And so controlling inflammation is a big piece, and it's tied to the coagulation part. So a lot of the herbs that have anticoagulant effects, or I should say coagulation modulating effects, remember plants they're not a single molecule, single target. They have pleiotropic effects. They're multitaskers, lots and lots of molecules changing the ecosystem in a way that modulates function. And that's what we're trying to do with herbs, target multiple pathways, use synergistic formulas. And there's a lot of safety there too. And one of the things I try to do generally with people, is bathe them in polyphenols, just these flavonoids mostly that are just really great modulators of inflammation, and they control free radical damage and, oxidative damage. They really start to shut it down with a really safe and effective approach. So, normalizing cell signaling pathways and controlling gene defects, turning on the p53 tumor suppressor. These plants and polyphenols can do that really well. And a lot of our greatest anti-inflammatory, I shouldn't say anti, I'll say inflammatory modulators are coming from that polyphenol group. And that whole idea of oxidative stress, they're going to quench the free radicals in amazing ways. Some of the big ones are like, resveratrol, right? The epigallocatechin gallate, amazing amount of research on how that modulates inflammation and modulates oxidative damage. We've got curcumin and the curcuminoids. We've got green tea and the catechins. So many great molecules that we've studied out there, and then plants that hold those molecules in matrices to get that bigger effect. And you put them all together and you start getting this great effect to control inflammation. So you want to control the inflammation, control the coagulation. Now, whatever treatment you do is going to be much more effective. And in some cancers, if you've identified it as a cancer that's really not that aggressive, it's not going to go out of control, you can actually inhibit cancer that way with those approaches. And so I put a number of slides up that just kind of lists some of the best examples of herbs that inhibit one particular pathway called COX-2, cyclooxygenase 2, which is a driver of a lot of cancer processes. And there's also a slide I have on the use of Celebrex, which is kind of one of those non-oncological pharmaceuticals that we can repurpose towards cancer, use it in a low dose, combine it with herbs synergistically, and get a bigger effect to modulate inflammation and also downregulate some of the cancer-related pathways like proto-oncogenes, turn on some of the tumor suppressors, regulate some of those signaling cascades that drive gene transcription in tumor cells. That's really cool that we can do that. And so I wanted people to have those lists. This is really cool. And there's research, behind each one of them. So I think I probably put 20 of them up there, but that's why they're there for people. And then there's been some really cool research. Celebrex has been used in pancreatic cancer. It's been used in prostate cancer. It's been used in a number of types of cancer to study how it would have effect. And in breast cancer, it was shown to target maybe, I don't remember how many genes, 16 or other known genes that were related to cancer progression, in addition to modulating inflammation. And my point is that we can use a low dose of Celebrex that's extremely safe, that you use. Always give any NSAID, any non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, given it with demulcents, lots of mucus lining generating, botanicals, mucilaginous stuff, the slippery elm, aloe, very important. The aloe is great with the asamannin. You've got marshmallow and the deglycyrrhizated licorice. All these things are going to help the body generate mucus lining so you're not going to get that, bleeding and damage that can occur when you take long-term, NSAIDs. But the NSAIDs actually regulate inflammation, and there's a lot of good data showing that they actually suppress cancer. And so when you combine something like Celebrex and curcumin, you'll see that you get synergistic effects. So you can use a lower doses of everything, low side effects, but high efficacy. I recommend a lot of people, and I talk to doctors, I share that, I share the research with them, and then they go, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I can do this low dose. We can do 100 milligrams twice a day or 200 milligrams twice a day. That's as high as that, my patients ever go. So on the reactive oxygen species, there's a concept in Chinese medicine called essence. And essence is like the material we have to make ourselves every day. It's very important. It's a yin substance. It's great for, quenching, cooling, calming. It builds us. It's, again, the anabolic part. And so glutathione is a really big part of how we quench the free radicals, right? And we have a lot of great tools in our botanical medicine toolbox and in our nutritional toolbox to build glutathione levels, to enhance essence, and to really start to and in prevention, really start to, ameliorate the damage that we're, basically accruing through all this exposure to toxins and to stress. And then these reactive oxygen species develop. And then that's all tied to inflammation again. So if you can support the essence, and again, calming the nervous system is really important. A great example of how calming the nervous system preserves your essence is you look at somebody who's, a methamphetamine addict, and it's an epidemic, across our country for sure. People love the stimulation, but anytime people are taking stimulants, remember, it's not the drug isn't going in and giving you energy. It's telling your body to use its stores of energy fast. So what happens when people use methamphetamine is they get a big outpouring of their essence in the form of catecholamines, dopamine, all the epinephrine, all the things that come out. And they're in the stress state, they're in the sympathetic response. And what starts to happen, they don't have any energy left over to rebuild their bones, to regenerate their bone marrow, to support their nerves, to rebuild their heart tissue. And what happens? Their teeth fall out. Their skin starts to hang, like they age rapidly. And so it's just a great example of how that goes. And so what I'm always trying to do is find ways to preserve essence. These stress calming techniques, the botanical medicine toolbox, calming the stress response is going to have a huge and profound impact on people's outcomes, whether they have cancer diagnosis or if they're trying to prevent it. So I wanted to go into I talked about lactic acid and lactate and urine pH and metabolic acidosis. So people with chronic disease, and even just a lot of people today in this world that we're living in, they just generate a lot of acidity in the blood, and the acidity doesn't result in an acidic blood. We've been through this argument, and years ago, it was so funny. People always say, you need to alkalize your blood. And it's like, well, no, you can't alkalize your blood. Your body is controlling your pH really tightly, 7.2 to 7.4 in the blood at all times. And if you get outside of that, you're in trouble. It's not a easy physiological thing to overcome. So your body has very tight mechanisms to control that pH. But what those mechanisms really rely on are banks of really important buffering molecules that are used to keep the pH at that perfect level. And so one of the issues that happens in cancer, which ties in with this, again, back to prevention and also treatment, is that when we're in a stress state, we generally start to get into a place where we're needing a lot of buffer. We need a lot of alkaline buffer to quench the buildup of acids in our bloodstream. And so we're quenching and quenching and quenching. Well, what happens is the buffering bank starts to get depleted. It's like a bank account. We're spending it and it gets deficient, it gets depleted. And a lot of people, you'll have them check their urine pH. And I'll do this with somebody with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I'll do it in every single cancer patient of mine. I'll say, I want your urine pH. I want it 3 days in a row, and I want you to do it 3-time intervals. So do it first thing in the morning waking, and then do it again in the midday, and do it again in the afternoon, evening. And I want you to give me the results, okay, after those 3 days. And most cancer patients are going to show me that they're somewhere down in the lower pH range. And the normal pH generally is thought of about 6.5 to 7 in the urine. And the urine is a good way to assess what is the what's your buffering capacity. If you don't have much buffer left, you're not going to be excreting much in your urine, and so your urine is going to be acidic relative to your blood. Remember, I said your blood is stable, but so you can measure the urine pH and see what the buffering capacity is. So what I do is I'll give people bicarbonate, and bicarbonate is really one of the best ways to quench lactic acid, particularly. And lactic acid I'm going to hit on here as one of the main drivers of that, depletion of bicarbonate buffer, because lactic acid is a byproduct of glycolysis, right? And glycolysis is what? It's lactic acid fermentation. It's the process by which you take glucose and you run it through this little cycle and you produce ATP, right? So you basically put in a molecule of glucose and you get these, you have to spend 2 ATP and then you get 4 ATP at the end of it. So you get a net of 2 ATP, 2 molecules of energy, and you also produce lactic acid as a byproduct. That's what cancer does, almost invariably. And it was thought for a long time that it was all anaerobic, that cancers were anaerobic glycolysis, but it's not. We know now that cancer it's got all the tools that we have. Like I said before, it can adapt to taking in fats. It can beta oxidize. It can aerobically glycolyze. It can use lactic acid as a fuel, and it does. And so when cancer starts going into this very glycolytic state, where it's using sugar rapidly because it's got this poor output of energy, right? And this is like the story. You talk about using poor choices of fuels. Man, my cells in my body, they go through this huge elegant process, right? So you get the little bit of, you take in sugar or fats and you turn it into pyruvate, and the pyruvate runs into the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle goes into the electron transport chain, goes into the oxidative phosphorylation, and I get 36 molecules of ATP, right? For that same molecule of glucose. It's brilliant. I mean, and here we are in a world where we're entrenched in burning fossil fuels and converting it into mechanical energy or electrical energy, which is incredibly inefficient. Another one of those parallels where we see that cancer, if it's the dark side of humanity manifesting inside of us, hey, there's a lot of energy in our world, and we don't have to burn fossil fuels and extract them out of the earth and then create tons of toxicity. And, we could not be doing that, but we are doing that. And cancer is doing that as well. So it sucks up the sugar, generates that little bit of ATP, but dumps lactic acid. And it's not only that the lactic acid is this material that has that acidification process that we have to buffer, but it also creates a downregulation in the immune system. It inhibits physiological function. It makes it very hard for the immune cells to actually identify and attack the cancer cells. Then on top of that, it ends up becoming a fuel where the cancer actually stratifies itself. This is the newest cool data that's coming out on this. I've been digging into the lactate thing for years, but more and more we're getting to see just how profound it is, and how you can't just say, oh, the Warburg effect, oh, it's aerobic glycolysis, oh, it's this. It's not. It's incredibly complex, just like our physiology. And so cancer will take on the outer layer, will be making lactic acid, making this environment that's filled with this acidification that the immune system is just suffering from. And then inside, the lactic acid starts to become a fuel for inner cells that start generating energy off lactic acid. And then they start feeding fuels back to the outer cells, and it's this self-generating complex. That's more complex than we ever thought it was. And again, if anybody tells you this is how cancer works, this is how cancer gets energy, just make sure that you know that they don't know, and that cancer is not any one thing, and it's complex, and it's evolving just like we are. So the point being that what we can do, and this is interesting because remember the sodium bicarbonate therapy, right? And it's been around a long time, and there's a lot of people that really have a lot of faith in it as a treatment for cancer. They would use high doses of sodium bicarb over long periods of time. Now, there's definitely some efficacy there. There's some things that have happened. There's a lot of anecdotal cases of really interesting things happening. And then you had someone like Simoncini, right, out of Italy, who was doing all this really cool work, and he was touting the power of sodium bicarbonate as a way to address cancer. And then I got on the whole thing about cancer as a fungus and blah, blah, blah. Again, cancer has some fungus-like features, but cancer is not a fungus. I mean, funguses are part of everything. It's just, it's in all life. But the point being that he injected tumors with bicarbonate. So he basically just took their whole acid inflammatory environment and filled it with alkaline buffer. And a lot of tumors just melted under that. And he had profound results. That's a very different thing than orally taking in bicarbonate, digesting it, absorbing it, getting into the bloodstream, and then storing it in the tissues to use as buffer, which is what we're talking about doing. And that's what I'm doing with my patients. So there is a benefit, but I'm not going to tell people that I'm going to cure their cancer with bicarbonate, I mean, I don't tell people I'm ever going to cure their cancer. I'm going to tell them we're going to take this journey together. We're going to make great choices, and we're going to do, we're going to get you the best possible quality of life and longevity we can. And so what we've learned is that if you build up the buffering system and you make sure that the tissues are rich, then you're going to have a lot of buffer available to soak up that lactic acid that's being generated in the tumor-related, the coagulopathy, where all that blood is. That blood's going to keep, it's going to keep getting flushed with enough bicarbonate to keep the pH normal, and it's not going to sap the other tissues, right? Lactic acid is that thing that happens right when you've been working out really hard and you push yourself too far, and now you're in anaerobic metabolism and your muscles burn. Well, that's happening at the cancer. So we're just going to soak up that lactic acid and soak it up. So what I do is I have people measure their urine pH, and then I give them enough bicarbonate to get their pH to, in most cancer cases, I'll go the other way. If they're having an acidic start, like if they're at 5 or 5.5, I'll push their pH up to 7 to 7.5, and I'll hold it there. And sometimes I'll kick it up to 8 to 8.5 for like 1 week out of the month, just to push it up there. Now, not all cancer, you don't just do this with every cancer patient. You measure their urine pH. Look at their lactic acid dehydrogenase level in the blood, determine if they're a good candidate for alkalinization. And a lot of them are. But I want to make sure it's an individualized treatment that we're talking about here. Does that all make sense to you?
It does. Yeah, I was just about to ask for what the typical dose you put people on of oral bicarbonate, but it sounds like it's not.
Well, not there is a range, and there's a way to do it, right? So if you find that a person has a low pH, again, sodium bicarbonate is sodium and bicarbonate, which if you take a lot of it, well, you're getting a lot of sodium. And if you get a lot of sodium, what you're going to do is you're going to oppose potassium. And so people who have taken high doses of sodium bicarbonate end up with the hypokalemia, and that's again not good. So what people do is they combat it by bringing in potassium. But what I've done is I just use low doses of what's called potassium bicarbonate with a little bit of sodium bicarbonate just to give them a balanced electrolyte load. And so most of my patients have magnesium as well. I don't have to give people calcium very often. I mean, our bones are a giant, bank of calcium. We don't need a lot of calcium. It's all about where we're putting it, and we're getting a lot of calcium through the day. But in cancer, magnesium is really important as an electrolyte, and then the sodium, potassium in a good balance. So the potassium bicarbonate, I normally use a capsule, like a 500 milligram capsule that has 99 milligrams of potassium bicarbonate or 99 milligrams of potassium as it's bound to bicarbonate, and 45 milligrams of sodium bound to sodium bicarbonate. So that combination, normally, anywhere between 2 and 4 caps twice a day will get someone with a pH of 5.5 up to a pH of 7. And I'll just have them keep it, just hold it there, as we're going through treatment and things. So really important. And there's some really cool data that's come out recently on the use of bicarbonates. And one of the things that's been shown to do is to inhibit metastases. It's sort of like in that realm for me of like the modified citrus pectin, which MCP it's a binder. It helps to bind things up. And so the idea is it kind of binds up circulating cells and kind of binds up factors in the blood. And it's related to galectin-3, which is this other fibrotic molecule. But the thing about that one is that it really is tied to these other factors, whereas the pH modulation, if someone has that that acid pH in their urine, that you can alter the terrain favorably by just getting them into that urine pH of 7.5. You can help to limit metastases and start to shut the cancer down, allow the immune system to function and soak up that lactic acid. So glad I got to make that point. It's one I really, it's a really important one.
Is that potassium bicarb, sodium bicarb? Is there a particular brand, product, et cetera, you like? We're not. We're the opposite of a professional conference. You're not allowed to mention brand names.
Oh, cool.
Actually,
it's I use Claire Labs. Claire Labs has a product called bicarb. That's exactly that ratio: 99 milligrams of potassium, 45 milligrams of sodium. Yep.
Cool.
Yep. And it's nice. It's inexpensive. It's something people can do. It's easy to do, and you can kind of monitor it yourself, so it gets you involved in your own healing process. So one of the things I just because of targets, right? We're targeting the biological terrain, and the metabolic part of it is really a big piece of it. So we got the neuroendocrine metabolo immune system, right? All that together. And the metabolic part of it is where I get into this glucose insulin signaling, body composition, adipocytes, right? Fat cells. And people that have elevated insulin, this has been shown in research in colon cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. If you have high insulin levels, even above 10, you're at much higher risk of developing cancer, and the cancers you have are going to be harder to treat. So getting people into a body composition that's going to be healthy for them, it's really important, because blood sugar, is if you have a lot of sugar, it's cancer's main fuel. So it's like any excess sugar that's floating around is like easy for cancer to grab. So you want to try to get people to a place where their blood sugar is controlled, so that there's just enough for the body, not enough for the cancer to have. And so I can't say enough about the importance of getting rid of what we call in Chinese medicine dampness, that turbidity, those adipocytes, the release of all these adipocyte hormones like leptin, the hunger hormone, and ghrelin, and there's adiponectin, or good one, resistin, which is that resists insulin and glucose functioning, and then you've got aromatase, right, which is the enzyme that breaks testosterone into estrogen. All these things are coming out of the fat cells, and remember, the fat cells are endocrine glands. They're secreting glands that are changing the whole context of the ecological terrain, the internal biological terrain I'm talking about. So you have to target this area, and you can't just tell people like, oh, you're going to change your body because of a composition like that. So we start using, agents that sensitize insulin, right? We start using things like, Natura has a great product, insulin glucose sensitizer, that has all these wonderful molecules in it, from the momorticin, from the Gymnema sylvestre, the goat's rue, all the things that are basically the plants that served as the molecular backbone for the glucose sensitizing agents used to treat diabetes patients, right? These are all came from plants initially. So combining those plants, and berberine is a fantastic one. Most of my patients will get berberine plus berberis-rich plants. And berberine is one of those molecules that is in the yellow colored plants, like in golden seal and coptis, scutularia. It's in philodendron. It's in some of the most powerful anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial plants that we have. And it regulates the microbiota population, and it also sensitizes glucose and insulin. So I always like berberine is really important. Simple things like chromium, and then just getting the sugar out of the diet. Intermittent fasting, water fasts, lots of exercise, all the things that will change that. All those things are targeting the metabolic issue, and they'll start to downregulate the insulin-like growth factors and all the related factors that together have a relationship that drive cancer, because insulin-like growth factors can push the epidermal growth factor receptor, it can push the estrogen receptor, and so it can drive lots of different types of cancers. And that's just one of those things that we really want to be aware of. And so I always am looking at those markers I mentioned before and make sure they get balanced in each patient, balance those metabolic issues. The last piece of the targeting I wanted to hit was just angiogenesis, as I mentioned in that earlier, when I kind of gave you the overview. And angiogenesis is the building up of new blood vessels, right? It's just the process, and we're going through it every day. We have to build new blood vessels all the time. And what's interesting is that, for a tumor that's bigger than 2 millimeters, there's not enough resource in the tissues around it, right? There's just not enough there to support its growth, because it's this very inefficient process of using lots of sugar and lots of resources to produce a little bit of energy to grow itself. So pretty soon it's like, okay, I got to get connected to the blood vessel. I need to mainline nutrients. I need to mainline sugar and all the things that I need. So in iron, iron is that genetic stabilizer it uses, copper for the angiogenesis, all these things, it needs more. So it starts to link itself into the blood vessel network. And there's a step-by-step process that happens. It's very dependent on something called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. It's a growth factor, comes out of the bone marrow. It helps the body. It basically generates the energy, like the phosphorylating, spark at the cell receptor to tell the cells to go in and rebuild blood vessels. Well, it requires also some other things like the matrix metalloproteases, which are molecules that, cut blood vessels open to allow a new blood vessel to attach to it. So there's this whole process, right? And what's interesting is that in cancer care, there are anti-VEGF agents. The main one that we've seen is one called bevacizumab, or Avastin. It's basically a sponge. It's a molecule that you put in the body. It goes around and it sucks up VEGF. VEGF just sticks to it. So it basically inhibits those highly vascular tumors, like liver tumors, for example, when there's ascites and things. It starts to kind of soak up that VEGF and slows down the tumor growth. Well, in a very small tumor, that's just 2 millimeters, just a little bit bigger, even in the earliest phase. If it's going to try to develop blood vessels, it's very dependent on that VEGF pathway. And what's interesting is that the VEGF pathway is copper dependent. It's dependent on copper as its primary cofactor, the reagent, the limiting reagent, in order for that vascular growth factor to work. So one of the things that Dr. McKee worked on a lot, and with some other folks over the last maybe 18, 19 years, developing this process that if you have a person who's in a state of NED, which is no evidence of disease, where there's no tumor that's over 2 millimeters, if you can decopper them and decopper the microenvironment of the tumor, there's no VEGF, and the tumor can't grow. It can't get past that step. And so that process, and this was studied, there's a bunch of studies that came out using copper chelation with tetrathiol molybdate. It's a molybdenum atom surrounded by these 4 thiol groups that grabs onto copper real well. It just grabs onto it. You can use that to decopper the body, but the research studies that were done in breast cancer, I think it was done in renal cell carcinoma. They didn't hit the same target, meaning you've got to drop the ceruloplasmin down to a certain level. It's got to be low enough that there's no available copper, and it has to be done in the setting of no evidence of disease. Because once the cancer has actually established blood vessels inside our network, then it's got other ways to start to learn how to develop blood vessels that are outside of the VEGF, and it's not just constrained by that copper. So that's where the thing breaks down. But if you can get a patient into no evidence of disease, you can get them on the copper chelation program, get their copper, the ceruloplasmin, down to between 8 and 14 nanograms per deciliter, that's our target. You can hold them in that, and if you keep them there for 3 years without letting them pop out for, let's say, months at a time, then the chance of them having a full remission is really high. We don't have anybody out of maybe 40, 50 patients now between our group who have made it 3 years. Not one of them's had a recurrence. So that's a profound opportunity that's there, but it's hard to get there, especially if you have a stage 4 cancer diagnosis, to get there, to get the decoppered environment there, and then to keep it steady. It's a long process, but really beautiful thing. And so targeting angiogenesis, a lot of the botanical medicines do it really well. They modulate angiogenesis really importantly. I want to kind of wrap up. I was supposed to do something here at 2:30. I've got a patient, so we're going a little long, but I just, I got so much to say. I'd love to share. I just got so much I want to tell you. But I'll just kind of just reinforce that I think that the concept of vital energy, of life force, of chi is really important. I think there's a functional and vital quality to the way that things work in the body, and something that we can assess with both the the microscopic look and also with all of our tools. Like look at that slide I gave at the physical exam. But the basis for disease in Chinese medicine is stagnation. Stagnation of qi, the inability of the body to create vital, free-flowing function. When function breaks down, then we have dis-ease. And that's all, I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's what qi is. It's not like it's a substance. You can't measure it. You can't measure gravity, but we still know it exists. Why? Because stuff falls. It's there. But what is it? Can you measure it? No, we can't measure it, but we know it's there. Same thing with qi. And I can feel it in people's pulse. I can see it in there. I can see it in you, etc. I want to hit that. And I want to say one other thing that's really important to me was that one of the reasons we don't see, and this is a common, thing that comes up with oncologists, is like, well, there's no data to support the use of those plants. You can't, I can't support that. There's no randomized clinical trials to support the use of ginseng. It's like, okay, all right. So do you want to fund the $2 billion it's estimated to cost to get a drug through clinical trials right now? And you can't patent it, so you can't make that money back. So you want to do that? Because then we can have the research, because I know it works. There's tons of animal data, tons of preclinical data, tons of traditional usage, but it's like, we're at an impasse. We can't possibly get all the plants and all the therapies into RCTs. And we can't just rely on RCT data to guide our treatment decisions. You look at the night sky, what do you see up there? It's mostly black, but there are some little dots up there, right? Those are the stars. What are those? Those are the clinical trials. But those stars do not guide all of the people that are standing in the blackness. They don't. So we have to be able to use other forms of evidence. And for me, the evidence is a path through the forest that starts with traditional usage and traditional information. What did we gain over thousands of years of observing, using a material in patients with disease, watching outcomes, refining, writing, teaching, training over hundreds and hundreds of generations? We can't throw that out. We can't say that's nothing, that's worthless. No, that is valuable empirical data that should be helping to drive our decision making. Then we have scientific research and we have clinical experience. We need to put it all together to get to good decision making for our patients. And that's really important to me. And I'll finish by saying I think our greatest work is done in prevention. And in the case of prevention, or in the case of people with cancer, it's a whole medicine approach that we need to take. It means that you address the whole person. You address all the different systems you can on every level, balancing their organ networks and resolving all the pathological factors, bringing into balance all the places that are out of balance. We have a thing that we call Sherlock's Corner, and it's basically like you go in and you utilize all the relevant information that you can, and you make the best possible decisions for each patient. There we are. I just lost, I lost audio on my side. Let's see. Oh, wait, you're muted. How do you, there you are.
I'm muted.
Hey.
All right.
Oh, there you go.
In case the editor didn't get any work. There you go.
Yeah, right. Nice.
That was amazing. That was really something special. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing, that was, man, just a blend of philosophy and science and practicality and all rolled into one there. That was, I know.
I'm so glad you like it. You appreciate it, man. Really.
Yeah, folks. I know folks are going to have a lot to go through and ponder and ask the doctor about or integrate, whatever. Lots of good stuff. One question. Back to enzymes. I've heard that you need to take them on an empty stomach to get the anti-cancer effects, or otherwise they're just going to be used for digesting. True or false?
True. Yeah. And I think that, you could encapsulate things, there's like the enteric coatings and things like that that can help them get into the, past the GI, the upper GI tract and get into the deeper places. But the idea is if they're fibrinolytic, they're going to digest proteins, especially something like, bromelain is actually like, a digestive aid, right? It helps a lot of people. It breaks down the proteins and they're able to digest them easier. So I always have my patients take them. And with most things, like with plants, I'll have people take them 30 minutes before or an hour after meal in general. Nutrients, generally okay to take them with food, right? It's comes from food, it's nutrition. But then when it comes to enzymes, I'll generally do an hour before or 2 hours after meals in order to make sure that, those enzymes can get in without digesting anything that's already there. That's a great point, and I meant to make that, so thanks.
Very good. And then any particular brand of enzymes or formulations or that sort of thing that you tend to gravitate towards?
Well, I generally use them all as, isolated individual components. I don't really use any combination
Yeah,
products,
okay.
but I do really like the lumbrokinase. Basically has the Bulaki. It's a Canadian company, and then there's Allergy Research Group. They both make a great lumbrokinase. It's a little bit pricey, but like I said, it's the best. It's the strongest, of them all. Bromelain. Lots of companies make good bromelain. I always look for companies that are GMP certified. I want them to be research oriented. I want them to be also traditional medicine based, and I want them to, do things in not non-compromising fashions. I don't want people to compromise any quality for giving me a price break. I think that the best place to spend money is on food and medicine, right? I mean, what else is there really? End of the day. And I'll just say one thing before I miss the opportunity. Just I want to say thank you so much, Ryan, for the courage, the diligence, the fortitude to sit here and to drive this train and to bring information really, and to try to bring a light, shine a light on oncology, on cancer, what I call the disease of our time, and get all these perspectives and bring them together and let people gravitate and find what really works for them. It's really powerful what you're doing, man. I really appreciate it.
Ah, well, it seems like it chose me, but I
I
appreciate
hear
the
I hear you there. Yeah.
appreciate the kind words nonetheless. This has been great. Do you want to let everyone know where to find all things Dr. Jason Miller? Anything in particular you're working on? Please tell us a little more about the cancering documentary. When do you foresee that coming out? Do you work remotely or just in person? All that good stuff.
Well, I do both remote and in person. I mean, more telemedicine now than ever, just because of the situation with COVID and so forth. But I love to see people in person anytime that I can. It's just better. I've been blown away before at how much information you don't get on a phone call, even on a Skype call, and almost always on an embedded site to try and get information. But I always miss something, like the way someone walks. Like, oh my God, I didn't realize. Like that's whoa, this is a thing going on for them. And so I love to have people in my office. I have my office in Ashland, but I'm also available. My website is drjasonamiller.com, and it's a great place. I've got a lot of resources there. Anything you want on that website is there. I've got some references, places I like to go for information, and I've got probably 25 or 30 lectures up there. The stuff that I've done over the last 10 years that's up there. Some of it's current, some of it's a little older, but it's all there. It's all accessible, and I want to just make it available for people. You can also find out how to, get it if you need help, guidance with the issue you're having. I'm happy to jump in and help, so people can find all that information there. I've got a great care coordinator, Linda Joe, who helps me out with, kind of linking to patients, and I've got a great team in my medicinary that, are just really sweet people. And the film that we're working on, I work with a local filmmaker here, Gary Lundgren, just produced a movie recently called Phoenix, Oregon. Just went national. It's really cool. He just kind of in the COVID thing, they did this sort of online release where they shared the ticket sales with each of the theaters that they were supposed to release into, and it went really well. It was really beautiful. He supported them, they supported him, and so he created kind of a cool model for film, getting films out in this time, the time of COVID. And so he and I have been working kind of together off and on some film projects, and we've been circling around this idea of doing a film around cancer. We finally settled on this. So I got a bunch of money in to start the project. I just got back from shooting some beautiful B-roll this last weekend in some of the nature around here, some beautiful pools, and harvesting some of the wild nature, the herbs and things out in the forest, and got that stuff together. And the film's really about living. It's about cancer. It's about cancering as a verb, because I always think, and that was what I was going to title the film, was cancering, but I think it's the name's going to come together. But the idea that we are all cancering right now. It's not something that's a static thing. I have cancer. We all have cancer in the sense both that we're undergoing all kinds of mutations in our bodies that we're basically stabilizing throughout the day. Some people estimate 10,000 potential cancer cells in each person in a day that we handle with our immune system, turning those things off with the right switches. And then also we're all connected to people who are suffering from cancer, family members, friends, and we're all going through it together. And then the way that we're impacting our ecosystem, to me, I feel like we've created a cancer on Earth. We've created a cancer that is basically uncontrolled growth, terrible use of energy, huge output of disastrous byproducts, and so forth. So the film kind of is an artistic piece that is going to sort of allow people to find their own way with it. But I want to just kind of present some ideas about my work, about what cancer is and what it isn't, and what we know and what we don't know, and then also talk about living and dying also, because it's a big part of it. So the film will be coming out. It was supposed to come out in June, but with COVID, we've been pushing things back. I just did a great interview with Dr. McKee. We just had a nice hour and a half on a Zoom call. Some of that'll be in there. I've got some patients that I've worked with on interviews, and I've got a lot of imagery and some animations and things. So look for that film to come out probably, I'd say by September. That's what we're shooting for right now.
Oh, good deal. Please let me know when it's out, and we'll be sure to help spread the word on it as well. And yeah, I was going to just say, talking about your website, if folks like the visual appeal of your slides, they'll like your website as well, because it is you got all the fancy yin and yang graphics on there and stuff, and it's really good. And that's why I also look forward to seeing the movie, because I'm sure you'll have a bit of that flair in there as well. I'll let you get to your patient, Dr. Jason Miller. Thank you so much for coming on the Anti-Cancer Revolution too.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you.
That was Dr. Jason Miller, everyone. I am Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, and we'll see you on the next one.
And again, this was one of many amazing talks from our Anti-Cancer Revolution online conference series. If you would like the entire first and second events, along with detailed notes from the talks, together with the actual slides from the presentations, and most importantly, the ability to ask these doctors and healers anything you want yourself directly, that's what you get with Going Integrative Plus. This is the resource and community my wife and I would have given anything for when we were going through cancer with our son. Each and every week we get one of the top integrative and holistic cancer doctors in the world on a call, and you get to ask them literally anything you want yourself. Listening to this podcast for your health is amazing, but getting to be the one asking the questions yourself about whatever you're currently trying to figure out dramatically shortcuts the learning curve and helps you make more right decisions faster and avoid the wrong ones. You also get every past call we've ever done, which is hundreds of hours of content that's all transcribed, time-stamped, and searchable, so you can see what all of our experts have said about any particular topic, which is a very nice antidote to how hard it's become to find good natural health information pertaining to cancer online these days. Huge discounts on all of our favorite supplements and devices, and maybe most importantly, a great community of people who are all on the same page with holistic healing. It is the absolute most valuable thing for someone serious about either preventing or reversing cancer we could imagine, which is why we made it. You can check it all out and become a part of it at goingintegrativeplus.com if you feel like this would be a helpful thing for you. And as always, remember, if you are going through cancer or anything else you'd rather not be, just keep going. God bless and Godspeed, and we'll see you on the next one.